Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to IGE Forum. Today, we are most fortunate, and I'm so privileged to have outstanding guest speaker, Dr. Victor Cha, a leading international authority on U.S. foreign policy, especially regarding Northeast Asia. He will be joining us live from Hawaii. I was about to say Washington, D.C., but he's been traveling quite a bit lately to discuss key diplomatic and security issues in the face of the rising geopolitical challenges, including U.S.-China continued tension, U.S.-China tensions, North Korea's provocations, and the deepening alliance, rather unfortunate, between North Korea and Russia. We expect, I would expect that Dr. Cha will also explore strategic implications for South Korea, particularly in the context of Trump 2.0 starting next week, and also the recent political turmoil in Korea. Dr. Cha is currently a distinguished university professor at Georgetown University, and also president of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department at CSIS, where he also serves as a Korea chair. Dr. Cha is a former director for Asian Affairs for the White House National Security Council and has served as President George W. Bush's top advisor on North Korean affairs. He holds PhD in political science from Columbia University. And in 2023, so a couple of years ago, he was named the Distinguished University Professor, the highest honor bestowed upon a tenured faculty at Georgetown University. In that respect, I feel always that Dr. Cha is a symbol of Korean pride in the United States. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Victor Cha, who will speak for about 30 minutes or so, followed by discussion and Q&A as scheduled. Victor, welcome to IGE Forum again. I understand you have been traveling heavily. This time we were hoping to have you in person in Seoul, but certainly I understand that Hawaii is a better better site than Seoul at this time of the year. Okay, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yours. So you will speak for about 30 minutes or so. There's a flexibility about the length of your presentation, and then we'll follow up with Q&A. I may mention that we have invited Chairman Sung Gi-hak, whom you know quite well, to join us as a commentator or say hi to you, and also Ambassador An Ho-young, former Korea's ambassador to the United States, and also we invited foreign speaker who's the chairperson of European Chamber of Commerce in Korea, because I thought it would be useful to hear some foreign perspective of the situation over here and in the Northeast. So I invited him to join us later as well. Okay? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chun. It's very good to be with you again in the IGE seminar, as well as to see Chairman Song. I saw him on the screen earlier, and Ambassador An. Happy New Year to all of you. 새해 복 많이 받으세요 to all of you. Thank you so much. It's good to see you all. I'm going to focus my initial remarks on sort of 7 broad points that I've thought about for this seminar. I think that'll give us enough of a basis for discussion. Dr. Chan, I also want to acknowledge that you've asked the head of the European Chamber to come and join us. That's great. I was just commenting the other day that I think I've made more trips to Brussels in the last year than I have to Seoul, Tokyo, to Seoul and Tokyo, in large part because there's a great deal of interest in Europe now with regard to political and security issues in the Indo-Pacific, because they see them as directly impacting politics, security, and economics in Europe. So I think that's a very important sign that the two regions are having much more of a dialogue these days on political and security issues than I've ever seen in my 30 years studying these issues. I also want to say I apologize that I was not able to come to Seoul. I'm in between trips to, I just came from Hong Kong and then I'm going to Tokyo, but I had an engagement here in Hawaii, so that's why I'm here now before I go back to the region, back to Tokyo. And especially it didn't make sense to go all the way back to DC only to come back out to the region again. So I certainly hope that I will be able to join you in person at some point in the future, but I'm very happy to join you. I'm very happy to join you online here. And I want to thank everybody, particularly Chairman Song, who I understand is in Vietnam now. I want to thank you all for being on the Zoom call today. So like I said, I'm going to start my initial remarks with sort of 7 key points on South Korea, on Trump and the US-Korea alliance, and on North Korea. And the first point, I think, which is obvious to everyone, is the prolonged domestic political instability and leadership vacuum in South Korea that really has the ability to impact everything, all the issues that we're talking about. In general, I think most have analyzed this, both on the economic and the political side, as unfortunate, but at the same time, I think there is the hope that the impact will be minimal or minimalized. After all, what is happening now in Korea is not the first time. We know that in recent history, it's happened at least 2 other times, in 2004 and 2016, both with different outcomes. But in the end, the main message from many government institutions, academics, experts, is that in the previous cases, we saw eventually the politics recovered, the economics recovered, and certainly everyone hopes that that is the case this time around. I will say that I do have some concern on the economic side that a protracted crisis, something that is not resolved along the timeline that most people are talking about, which is the summer, either the early to midsummer. If it's not all resolved at that point, there could be broader and longer term repercussions. And the reason I say that is because if we look at the explanations for why there was minimal damage after the 2004 impeachment and the 2016 impeachment, they point to factors or causal variables that I would argue were present in 2004 and in 2016, but are arguably not present in 2025. So in the case of 2004, the overturned impeachment of Roh Moo-hyun, this did have an initial economic and political impact on the country, but in the end, economic gains were recouped, and the politics, of course, resumed, and the Roh Moo-hyun administration finished their time in office. But one of the big factors there that contributed to a quick and early recovery for South Korea from the political crisis was the fact that we were seeing double-digit Chinese economic growth, and that was a variable. Chinese economic growth was a variable that was helping the Korean economy to recover to recover fairly quickly. It was also just after China had entered the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So there was a lot happening on the economic side that helped with the Korean recovery. In 2016, 2017, when President Park Geun-hye was impeached and the Constitutional Court upheld the impeachment decision, there was also an economic impact, but the economic impact was somewhat minimized by what at the time was really quite successful, quite positive growth in the export sector for semiconductors, the semiconductor industry. And so that was a huge boon to the Korean economy that allowed for there to be minimal economic damage despite the political crisis that had occurred. The point I'm making here is that if we look at 2025 and a protracted crisis, neither of those two economic variables are arguably there. China is not growing like it was in 2004. And the semiconductor export sector, while it's still healthy, was certainly not at the levels it was in 2016 and 2017. In addition to that, and not at all insignificant, we're still, well, certainly in the middle of one war in Europe and possibly out of another war in the Middle East. In addition to that, we have uncertainty with regard to the incoming Trump administration and what sort of economic actions he might take against allies. So the point here is that, if this crisis goes beyond sort of the summer, again, many of the variables that contributed to sort of fairly rapid economic recovery, political recovery, are arguably not there in 2025 like they were in 2004 and 2016. A protracted crisis also puts South Korea in a bad situation regarding its dealings with the incoming Trump administration. Right now, the only prominent figure who has met with Trump and Elon Musk on the Korean side has been from the private sector, right? A CEO of Shinsegae Group, who had visited Mar-a-Lago at the invitation of Donald Trump Jr. That CEO, as well as the CEO of another economic group in South Korea, are the only ones that are being invited to attend Trump's inauguration next week. So the concerns here are that are emerging is that a South Korean government, which is in a state of diplomatic standstill due to the leadership vacuum, will face some difficulties in responding to President-elect Trump once he starts office. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute in a little bit more detail. The second larger point is that North Korea remains a persistent security risk, but this persistent security risk could be also exacerbated by the prolonged domestic political instability. Under the Biden administration, we have seen a total of 161 North Korean provocations, including 90 missile launching events and 32 waves of balloon launches. This is the most ever under any U.S. administration since 1953. During the first Trump administration, there were a total of 41 provocations, including 35 missile demonstrations, 1 nuclear test, and 5 other types of provocations. So the Trump administration and a future South Korean administration are dealing with a much more belligerent and somewhat unrestrained North Korea. And the concern is, of course, about some sort of miscalculation by Kim Jong-un. South Korea's domestic crisis, North Korea was first a bit cautious to respond to the instability, but as the situation goes longer and longer, North Korea may also find this favorable to some sort of provocative actions. As we all know, they recently tested an IRBM on January 6th, claiming it to be a hypersonic missile. This was the first test of 2025, right before Trump's inauguration. and the first since the short-range ballistic missile launch on November 4th in 2024, around the time of the U.S. election. North Korea may be primed for some sort of miscalculation because they like to do belligerent acts at the start of a new U.S. administration. So they see the start of the Trump administration as an opportunity where they might do that. At the start of the Obama administration, they did a nuclear test. And at the start of the last Trump administration, they also did a thermonuclear test. The one exception to this rule was the first year of the Biden administration, where North Korea did not do anything. But that, I think, is attributable to the fact that they were in COVID lockdown at that time, which probably stopped them from doing anything. But they've certainly made up for that lost year by all the actions they've taken over the past couple of years. And then, of course, the strengthened Russian DPRK relationship dangerously may provide North Korea with new missile technologies that they will want to demonstrate, new missile technology, perhaps new submarine technologies that they may want to demonstrate. Plus, this new security treaty between the two sides may make North Korea feel overconfident. At the same time, though, North Korea could be more cautious. Because if they carry out provocations, that might give legitimacy to Yoon's martial law, as the declaration stated and talked about anti-state pro-North Korean activities. And unnecessary escalation might be counterproductive, as North Korea has sent troops to support Russia, while also taking defensive measures like destroying roads and inter-Korean connections along the border. So that's the second major point. The third major point is with regard to the Trump administration, and here one of the main concerns is how Trump will respond to the special measures agreement and defense cost sharing issue. The current SMA agreement, which is the 12th SMA agreement, covers from 2026 to 2030. The United States and South Korea set the first year, 2026, of defense cost sharing at about a little over $1 billion, which is an 8.3% increase from 2025. And as you are well aware, the Biden administration proposed renewing the SMA prematurely, early, even though it had 2 more years left on it, as a preemptive action to try to avert alliance tensions and a lack of agreement, as we saw during the first Trump administration. But now with Trump coming into office, there are concerns that he could tear up or withdraw from the agreement or pressure South Korea to renegotiate the agreement. My guess is that when this was renegotiated between the U.S. and South Korea, it really wasn't something that Trump had any attention to, because he was focused on the campaign. But as some of you may have read, when he was asked about it in a press interview, he said that South Korea should pay $10 billion a year for cost sharing. And he said this in October. The fourth, I think, concern is with regard to troop withdrawal. Trump views many allies as freeloading on security, while the U.S. is in a trade deficit with U.S. troops hosted by allies. I don't know if we have Julia, I don't know if we have the slide that I wanted to just share with everybody. I don't know if do we have that slide? Oh, yes. If you could put it up on the screen, that would be great.
This one is okay.
I don't know if people can you see it? I don't see it.
Oh, we can see it.
Oh, you can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Okay. So this was a slide we put together that pretty much, I think, sums up how Trump views allies and partners. He views them basically along two axes. One of them has to do with trade, merchandise trade, and whether an ally or partner has a trade surplus or deficit with the United States. And the second axis is in terms of defense spending and whether the country or the partner or the ally is spending enough. And we defined enough as 3% of GDP on national defense. And we picked these two axes because this is basically the way Trump has always talked about allies and partners, that they're cheating him on trade, or they're not, and that the U.S. is paying for everyone's defense, and that they're free riding off U.S. defense commitments. He said this during his first term in office. He continues to say it now, and it's been something he's believed going back for decades. So what we did was we plotted all NATO allies and Indo-Pacific allies and partners along these two axes. And as you can see, well, it may not be as clear. Every NATO ally and Indo-Pacific partner, or many of them, in Trump's eyes, fail on one or both accounts. On the trade side, they either run a trade surplus with the United States, and on the defense side, they're spending less than 3% of GDP on national defense. The only NATO ally that meets Trump's criteria is, and I think you can barely see it on the screen there, the only one that meets Trump's criteria is Latvia. The only Indo-Pacific ally that does not completely fail from Trump's perspective is Australia. Australia is the only Indo-Pacific ally that runs a trade deficit with the United States. All other allies run a trade surplus, including South Korea's, which is on the order of $51.4 billion, which is the fourth highest trade surplus with the United States, behind Germany, Japan, and Canada among NATO and U.S. allies. So South Korea has had concerns in the past over Trump talking about withdrawing forces from South Korea. On the one hand, some of these fears were ameliorated because there was bipartisan agreement in the U.S. Congress during Trump's first term in office on the necessity of maintaining U.S. forces in Korea. And as long as that bipartisan support was there, that was a pretty stable position for things to be in. But today, as Trump enters office, it's not necessarily true that that bipartisan consensus exists. Moreover, and perhaps most importantly, the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, which used to have a clause in it that limited the ability of the U.S. administration to withdraw forces from Korea. It limited their ability to do that. That was in the National Defense Authorization Act during Trump's time in office. Today, it is no longer in the National Defense Authorization Act, so that Congress's check on Trump's ability to take actions like pull troops from Korea or from Germany, that check is no longer there. In large part because during the 4 years of the Biden administration, there was no need for it, right? Biden was not going to pull troops from Korea or Germany. But I think it's certainly a concern, certainly a concern now. The fourth point I wanted to mention has to do with concerns about tariffs. As I said, Trump looks at a country like Korea and sees massive trade surpluses, and also sees defense spending lower. Again, we said 3%. Apparently, at some point, he was asked about this, and he said 3% was not enough. It had to be 5%, in which case no country, no Indo-Pacific or NATO ally meets that number. But there is a concern that Trump is considering declaring a national economic emergency to permit a new tariff program. This sort of declaration would allow Trump to construct a new tariff program using something called the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, or IEEPA, IEEPA, which unilaterally authorizes the president to manage imports during a national emergency. This has certainly raised concerns in South Korea. It partly is one of the reasons why we've seen a further depreciation of the Korean currency. Of course, it's not the only reason. But this is a real concern that we could see either 10% across the board tariffs, new types of tariff schemes through IEEPA, and then also something that I think we're starting to see already, which is another provision in the Trade Act that allows the United States not to do across the board tariffs, but to target certain companies and impose import quotas on certain companies. I think that would more likely be applied to places like companies in China, but those are the other sorts of things. And then the fifth point is with regard to what could happen between a Trump administration and North Korea. There are some subsets here, but let me just put them into three categories. The first is concerns that the United States might move more to an arms control paradigm with North Korea and dispense with CVID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. There was a report in December of 2023 that Trump was considering a plan to let North Korea keep its nuclear weapons and offer the regime financial incentives to stop them from vertically proliferating, that is, making more nuclear weapons or more long-range ICBMs, but entering some sort of arms control negotiations where they would keep their weapons, but they would stop making ones that were most threatening to the United States. This, of course, would be very concerning for South Korea, but I think Trump is well aware that the previous attempts at negotiation failed when it came to denuclearization, and so some have said that this is something that they might be considering. So that's point 5. Point 6 is there are concerns about decoupling, and that is that Trump might not rule out the possibility of offering partial sanctions relief to North Korea, again, on the conditions that they stop development of those capabilities that threaten the U.S. homeland, but not necessarily focusing on those capabilities that threaten the Korean Peninsula. Both this and an arms control deal would be a form of decoupling in the alliance, because it would mean that the United States was negotiating for only its own security and not the security of allies. It would also have the effect of legitimizing North Korea's status as a de facto nuclear weapon state, which is, of course, a big concern for South Korea. I've lost track of my points, but related to this is the concern about what's called Korea passing, the notion of Korea passing in the U.S. DPRK negotiation talks, especially if there is no government, no functioning government in South Korea. 6 months or longer into a Trump administration, if there's no functioning government in South Korea, then the chance of Korea passing, I think, becomes very, very high. Of course, the acting government is doing the best it can today to maintain regular contact with the Biden administration. I mean, Foreign Minister Cho has been very active The National Security Advisor has been very active. Vice ministers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been very active. The defense minister has been very active. But everybody in the U.S. and particularly in a new Trump administration knows that this is not the government they're going to be dealing with. They're going to be dealing with a new government. And I hope it's not the case, but I think it will be harder. I mean, the Biden administration was very receptive to continuing to do lots of meetings with the South Korean side to ensure that there was continuity. I'm worried that a Trump administration will not be as interested in doing these meetings until a new government is in place. And then the sixth point is the concern about a potential, quote, in quotation marks, early deal with North Korea. Particularly if we see more and more North Korean provocations, there may be pressure on Trump to try to deal with this issue sooner rather than later. Obviously, he'll be very focused on domestic issues like tax cuts, like the border, immigration. And then internationally, the focus will be on trying to cement this peace in Gaza as well as the war in Ukraine. But he may also think about, and he may be thinking about an early deal with North Korea for three reasons. The first is that Trump is a very confident individual, and he has met and has maintained contact with Kim Jong-un for quite some time, and so he might have a great deal of feel like he has a great deal of confidence in dealing with North Korea, and that might contribute to him engaging early on. Second possible favorable factor for an early deal is the absence of high-level officials who would restrain Trump. During his first term, you had people like H.R. McMaster, John Bolton, two of his national security advisors, Secretary Mattis, Jim Mattis, all who tried to restrain Trump from doing things that might be too risky or too dangerous. I think we're seeing with the appointments in the second term under Trump is that the primary criteria for these people is not whether they pass muster with the mainstream Republican establishment. The main criteria is whether they are 100% loyal to Trump. And so I think in particular, we see this in the appointments, the potential appointments in Secretary of Defense and Director of National Intelligence, where he's clearly appointing Attorney General, where he's clearly appointing people who are extremely loyal to Trump. So the sort of internal restraints might not be there. And then the third reason for a possible early deal is working in a sort of the opposite fashion, in the sense that he might seek an early deal with North Korea as a way to gain leverage over the alliance with South Korea in advance of a new government coming in. So in other words, he might seek an early deal with North Korea to have better leverage in terms of SMA renegotiations, or to have better leverage in terms of talking about troop withdrawals or a peace treaty with North Korea, these sorts of things. So all of these are, quite different and paradigm shifting scenarios. My final and seventh point is that while these are things that we really need to think about and be concerned about with regard to a second Trump administration, there still are some restraining factors that might cause him not to go so immediately to some sort of early deal. The first of these, as I already mentioned, is that he may not have the time or the bandwidth to prioritize North Korea, given all of the other issues that he's very focused on seeing early action on. Again, the war in Ukraine, tariffs, the war in Gaza, the border, immigration issues. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of the initial executive orders are focused on those sorts of things rather than focusing on the negotiation with North Korea. The negotiation with North Korea would take a lot of time and energy. It would take a lot of his personal time and energy, and he just may not have time for that immediately. Second potential restraining factor from some sort of early deal is the opposite of what I said earlier, is that Trump may have confidence in his ability to talk to Kim Jong-un and to negotiate with him, but he also may not trust Kim Jong-un based on the failure of the Hanoi summit and based on the fact that he thought they had an agreement in the Singapore summit and then the failure after the Hanoi summit, and then the absence of any further progress after the meeting in Panmunjom. So if the first reason that we might not see an immediate deal with North Korea is that they'll be focused on Ukraine, tariffs, Gaza, the border, immigration, the second is that he may not just trust that Kim is able to make the sort of deal that he wants. And then the third reason we might not see an early deal has less to do with the United States and has more to do with DPRK and Russia. This relationship has become extremely strong. It's a renewal of the Cold War era type security guarantee and alliance that the two countries shared during the Cold War. There's a great deal that North Korea is now getting from Russia in terms of food and fuel and medicine and all sorts of things that simply might make it less. North Korea may have less of an incentive to deal with the United States because of this very big and growing relationship with Russia. They may just not see the need for that. In 2017, 2018, North Korea was in a different position. It didn't have a strong relationship with Russia, didn't have a strong relationship with China, and maybe they saw a need to do that. But in North Korea's current situation with a very strong relationship with Russia, increasing efforts by China to get closer to North Korea as a result of the relationship with Russia, the North Koreans may feel no need at all to deal with Trump, at least for the time being. And so this would be the third possible reason that there might be restraint from an early deal. So again, there's plenty to think about here as we approach the inauguration of the new U.S. president, as we sit and watch what is happening in South Korea's own domestic politics. From my perspective in Washington, D.C., all the questions that I get these days really don't have anything to do with North Korea or anything to do with what's the Trump administration going to do. All the questions really have to do with what's going on in South Korea these days and how soon or how long it will take to for the political crisis to be resolved. Because I think given the broader context in the world today and the role that Yoon was playing in terms of really stepping up South Korea's global presence, participating in the G7, participating in NATO, providing support in Ukraine, at a very key moment where many sort of global governance and liberal-based institutions are under stress. They saw what Yoon is doing, regardless of what has been happening domestically for Yoon. They saw what Yoon was doing on the global stage as very important. And I've heard this from in Japan, in Southeast Asia, all over Europe, that there was a lot of approval for what Korea, 12th, 13th largest economy in the world, was doing, stepping up on both the political and on the economic side. So because of that, there's a great deal of attention right now on what's happening in South Korea and a hope that it will all be resolved in the not too distant future. So Dr. Chan, with that, I think I've gone over my time limit. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor, for your brilliant opening speech, which covered a comprehensive picture of the stakes we have at this very critical moment with the new administration coming on board starting next week, Trump 2.0, whereas Korea's internal domestic political environment, as you described, is very precarious. It's a very disturbing situation. But as you pointed out, Korea has a long track record to rebound from a very tough, challenging environment crisis, whether there is economic or political in the past. So we are very much hoping to demonstrate again our exceptional resilience in coping with this impending turmoil we are facing. But I very much appreciated your 7 specific points that we have to reflect on in dealing with our current challenges, as you described. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have a great privilege to invite Chairman Sung Gi-hak, who's traveling now. You said earlier he's in Vietnam there. As you know, Chairman Sung of Yongwon Trading Group.
Yongwon Corporation.
Yeah. Okay. Come, please join us, Chairman Sung. Welcome to our.
Dr. Cha, Chairman Jung Kong-woo, and Ambassador An Ho-young. I'm very pleased to attend this gathering, and thank you very much for explaining all the situation. But as I arrived in Hanoi Airport, I found that Russian Prime Minister's airplane was there. Something is going on there too, going on here too. And well, I am more concerned about the domestic issues. But since acting President Han Duck-soo was impeached again, there are more discussions going on among Koreans that people are feeling that President Yoon's whatever he has done was less questioned, and then the popularity of this ruling party as well as Yoon Suk-yeol has risen up steeply. That is the situation I'm seeing in the country there. But I have a feel that there is much less of a North Korean pressure. Of course, apart from those Russia and North Korean allies, what kind of help, technical help they would have to make North Korea more capable of striking anywhere with more precision. But other than that, I think this is North Korean pressure is, I feel personally, much less. But China is a dominant influencing party here, dominant. So this is a big issue we need. On the other hand, there is an economic point of view. Chinese oversupply of all manufactured items. This is ruining all the industries in and around Korea and other countries. So I think we are seeing the collapse of industries, in many areas. That is the things that we should, how we learn and act, how to protect this one. Really, wiping out all the industries outside of China. That is one thing I want to mention as a background to consider. So unfortunately, I learned that acting President Han's impeachment case will be only heard February 5, while this Yoon's procedure around the Yoon is expediting. This is a situation which I do not, enjoy actually, because acting President Han was also a very good sign of keeping the country going on without that kind of the more damages. But unfortunately, he was impeached. That is also the procedure about the impeachment dispute is being delayed. That means that the impeachment or this Constitution Court is not really neutral, I must say, unfortunately. Well, this is the only thing, and I want to thank Dr. Cha. And then there are many things I could discuss in person, but I'm also trying to find out time to travel to meet you and the friends out there so that we understand better. And then I also get better understanding of the situation, considering all the things happening now, which is overwhelming by any standard. But one good news is we have a very good government for our business in Bangladesh. So we are expediting our business out there. Thank you very much. Anyway. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman Song. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Next, as I mentioned earlier, we have Ambassador An Ho-young, who served as Korea's ambassador to the United States. I wouldn't introduce him in any detail because we don't really need it. So, Ambassador An.
Well, Victor, let me start by thanking you for taking time to speak to us in the middle of your very hectic schedule. And well, thank you again for your 7 points. And I wish to make comments and then questions on your point 5 and 6. And your point 5 was on the possibility of Trump administration moving the objective of goal for North Korean nuclear issues from denuclearization to arms control. And your 6th point was the possibility of decoupling strategic interests of the United States and Korea along the way. So when I was listening to those 5 and then 6 points, then 2 questions came up in my mind, which is that how in fact high is the possibility of that taking place? Because you know it, I know it, North Korean nuclear issue is under heavy review by the transition committee in my mind, which is going to take some more time. So how do you think high the likelihood of that in fact happening in the Trump administration? My second point, the second question in my mind was, well, were it to happen, that is to say, moving the objective from denuclearization to arms control and decoupling strategic interests between Korea and the United States, again, I don't have to explain to you what impact it will have upon Korea. It, in fact, would create a wholly different geostrategic and geopolitical and even geoeconomic condition for Korea. And then, well, Chairman Song, he just mentioned the word China. And then the way I look upon it is that China seems to be, in a sense, well, seeing certain positive side when Mr. Trump is coming back to power, in the sense that because, well, there is a high likelihood that the alliance relationship between the United States and the other allies of the United States, it in fact could be alienated And then that, in fact, would create an opportunity for China. That's there. And then that, in fact, is something which could happen in case of, change of Trump administration's focus from denuclearization to arms control, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the same time, again, I don't have to explain to you that there will be very heavy pressure in South Korea that we must develop our own nuclear weapons. So all those questions came up in my mind. My second point is about restraining factors. And then you just shared with us about 3 restraining factors. And I was wondering, as additional restraining factors, I was thinking about at least 2 restraining factors. One, the role of the Congress. And then recently, the chairperson for the Senate Armed Services Committee, Mr. Wicker, and Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. Risch, were appointed. And again, Victor, I don't have to explain to you what they think about the allies, what they think about Korea, and then what they think about North Korean nuclear issue. And I'm pretty sure, even in the House, the leadership in the House for Arms Control Committee and then Foreign Affairs Committee could, in fact, be the leaders of the same mold. So that, in fact, was one restraining factor during Trump 1. And I was wondering if it could be, continue to be, a restraining factor under Trump 2 as well. And then another restraining factor, which came up in my mind, is Victor Cha. Of course, you could, in fact, put senses into those people who are working on North Korean dossier in the Trump administration. So let me stop there. If I could make one additional point, I was just listening to you, and I was reminded about early days of Trump administration back in 2017. And then was reminded in February, Mr. Mattis came to visit Korea. In March, Mr. Tillerson came to visit Korea. And in April, Mr. Pence, the vice president, came to visit Korea. And then, of course, at the time, Mr. Hwang Kyo-ahn was an acting president. But at the same time, those leaders came to visit Korea, even if they were having very busy time during the early days after inauguration. So I really appreciated it. But at the same time, I think there was a very firm intention on the part of Trump administration to show to the Koreans that United States is firmly committed to the alliance between Korea and the United States. So let me stop there. Thank you once again.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah. Dr. Cha, your response?
Thank you. Thank you for all of these wonderful comments from both Chairman Sung and Ambassador On. It's only in the IGE seminar that when someone gives a presentation, they get comments from a CEO, chairman of a business, and an ambassador. It shows the high level of group that Dr. Chun brings together. I know we're short on time, so I will try to answer these as concisely as I can. First, I think it's very interesting, Chairman Song, that you said that you saw the Russian Prime Minister is in Vietnam at this particular time. This is not well reported around the world, but there clearly is a strategy that Putin is following with regard to Vietnam. Of course, when he went to Pyongyang, he also went to Vietnam. And I think he really sees these two pieces, North Korea and Vietnam, as a very important part of China's reestablishment of its position in Asia, and in particular in ways that are very disconcerting to, at the same time, both the United States and to China, right? If he were to pick 2 countries where he thought he could make the most inroads in ways that would dislodge sort of the traditional positions of the United States and China in the region, it's these 2 countries. And so I think this is part of a real effort. On the recent popularity of the PPP, I've read that they're now up to 40 points and within the margin of error with the DP, which is something I think that many Americans did not expect. I do not know what that means for the fate of President Yoon, but I think from a US perspective, it is an important sign that the Korean public, even though they may have differing views about what President Yoon did on December 3rd, I think is interpreted in the US as meaning the Korean public certainly liked the foreign policies of the PPP and President Yoon. And so I think that's a very important message to send. On the whole question of decoupling and a deal with North Korea, I think I think about it in terms of is Trump more inclined to try to get an easy deal or try to get a hard deal? A hard deal is CVID when you're talking about nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles, and short-range ballistic missiles. That's a hard deal. An easy deal is one in which you just stop nuclear testing and stop missile testing, long-range missile testing, and you don't worry about the other sorts of things. And I think Trump is much more inclined to the easy deal. He's much more inclined to the easy deal. And he said in his first term when Abe and others, Shinzo Abe and others talked about short-range testing, he said he doesn't care about short-range missiles. Everybody has them, I think was his quote. And so that's not a good sign. With regard to China, I think absolutely China sees real opportunities to make inroads in a Trump administration. Even though I think they were very concerned about how much progress the Biden administration made in terms of the bilateral alliances, Camp David, AUKUS, IPEF, the Quad, made real progress there. And I think they think that they can undo a lot of that under Trump because Trump won't care about that as much. In terms of Congress and others, like other people who could try to restrain Trump, I think those people are there. I mean, I think there are people in Congress that would not want to see withdrawal of troops. I think people like Alex Wong as Deputy National Security Advisor, Ivan Kanapathy as Senior Director for NSC, all of these people are in the right place when it comes to foreign policy to the region. The problem is they're not going to be making the policy. Trump's going to be dictating the policy, and they're just going to be trying to catch up. And then finally, on the early visits by Tillerson and Pence to Korea in 2017, in 2018, meeting with acting president, I feel like that situation was different in two ways. The first is these early visits by Tillerson and others were in part the result of internal competition in the Trump administration, where they were trying to fight over who should control foreign policy. And so we see it in McMaster's book. McMaster and Tillerson had fierce arguments about this. And I think that was part of it. The other part of it was, I think there was a desire to show strong ties with South Korea because, North Korea was doing all of these things, and Trump really didn't know how to handle North Korea. I mean, he did not know what to do at that point. So for those reasons, both the internal bureaucratic fight as well as, not knowing what to do with North Korea, so the best thing was to be with the ally. That's what led to the early visits. But this time around, Trump knows how to deal with North Korea. He's not worried about that. And there won't be an internal bureaucratic battle over who controls the policy because Trump controls the policy. And so for this reason, I thought I'm more worried that about Korea passing, what I mentioned earlier about Korea passing.
Okay, sorry, I should have introduced our third, last but not least, the commentator. I should have done that. Sorry to intervene. Now let me invite Mr. Philip Van Hoop, who's chairperson, as I said, of European Commerce, European Chamber of Commerce here in Korea, and also he is a country manager of ING, the Dutch International Dutch Bank, ING Bank in Korea as well. Sorry, Philip. Welcome to our forum today. Okay, your questions? We cannot hear you. Philip? Okay, go ahead.
새해 복 많이 받으세요. So that's
Okay.
my first comment. Thank you so much, Chairman John, Thank you so much, distinguished Professor Cha, and then also Chairman Sung and Ambassador An. So I'm going to try not to repeat what the very good comments they've given. Maybe to expand on two things, Professor Cha. First of all, your many trip to Brussels and the fact that you echoed that Europe woke up to the link for the APAC. I can fully align with you. Meeting with Ambassador Ryu, Korean Ambassador Ryu to the European Union last October was definitely for me the evidence that I heard also walking down the alleys of the European Commission that Europe fully understands that there is no stability in the Northern Atlantic without stability in the North Pacific. Just to echo the comments of the previous Prime Minister in Japan. And also the invitation to NATO summit in Madrid for the Prime Minister of Japan in the President June were very important. So fully understood, definitely. Second thing, you know, Chairman John kindly alluded to my role as ECCK chair, and you made remarks about, you know, the situation in Korea today. I just have to share my just little comment is that we have been invited to meet with the acting president, with the deputy prime minister, with the minister of Moti, Andakun, 2 times acting president Che. We met Mayor Oh from Seoul. We met the Gyeonggi-dong province governor and the chairman of the FSC, and so on, within a month, Chairman John. It's unparalleled. No other country in the world would take so much care of foreign investors, and I also include AmCham and, you know, the other largest. So I believe really that the message we received is a very strong business message. We have seen the resilience of the democratic system in Korea, and we are seeing our members carrying business as usual. So that is my little contribution before I go to the question, but I really wanted to share this with you because there is sometimes a different image of Korea on the media, but I have repeated to acting President Che that whatever report is given by the subsidiaries of foreign companies like European companies to their head office actually matters even more. And the business as usual reports are very important. So that is my message. Now, maybe 2 questions to you. One, geopolitics, and the other one is economic. The first one, geopolitics. I heard all of your point about the concerns about, you know, the relationship between Korea as a key ally to the United States. I would like to turn it around, if I don't want to be too provocative, but turn it around. What would be the US without allies? In my sense that the US is a maritime power. It needs access to the North Atlantic and above all today to the North Pacific. And for that, it needs allies on the other side of these oceans. So that's my very simple question.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Cha.
Thank you, Mr. Van Hoof, for these comments and the question. I entirely agree with this phrase that used, no stability in the North Atlantic unless there's stability in the North Pacific. I think that's an excellent phrase, and I think that really sums up the level of discussion and cooperation. I will also say that every time I go to Brussels, I feel like the conversation taking place among Europeans about North Pacific security now rivals that of the conversations we have in Washington, D.C. That was not the case 5 years ago, right? But it's very much the case today. And then the people they have at NATO, for example, who are working on the North Pacific and working on Japan and Korea are excellent. Like the level of, policy is people. And if you don't have good people, they have really good people working on this. The second is that it's very good to hear that the acting government is reaching out to you, to your European colleagues, to the American business community to say that that things are business as usual. It's a very important message to send. At one point, CSIS was part of a group that hosted the Federation of Korean Industries who came to Washington, D.C. And at one point, the U.S. Chamber was thinking because of what was happening in Korea that they should postpone the trip. But in contrary to that, many people said, no, it has to look like business as usual. And besides, the Korean businessmen want to hear from the U.S. side, what it's going to be like under Trump too. And the American businessmen want to hear from the Korean side about what's going on in Korea. And they want to be able to have those conversations, those clear channels. It's very important. So I entirely agree with the business as usual. On your question about shouldn't the U.S. need and want allies, whether we're talking about in terms of export controls or strategic competition, Russia, Ukraine, China, North Korea, Iran, the United States needs allies and partners. I agree with that 100%. I entirely agree with that view. And I think that there are many who will staff the Trump administration that will also make the same arguments internally. But my concern is that Trump just thinks about things differently. And, we tried to encapsulate that in the chart that we drew about the way he thinks about allies and partners. And what is most concerning to me is that his response to the question about how do you deal with adversaries without allies is his response is, I don't need allies because I'm going to engage the adversaries myself, right? And so we know he has this attraction to people like Xi Jinping and Putin and Kim Jong-un. That would be fine if you were cutting really good deals that lead to stability and peace. But if you're just looking for easy deals that don't really address all the questions, I think that's where the concerns become very, very acute. So I'm giving you my very frank and honest opinion about what I'm worried about when it comes to Trump 2, because I think many of his worst tendencies will be facilitated in a second Trump administration, when in many ways there were people who are trying to mitigate those worst tendencies in the first Trump administration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Philip, for your very thoughtful comments and questions as well. Dr. Chow, time has run out, but if you don't mind, could we spend 5-10 more minutes? Is that okay?
Sure. Yes, I do have another event I need to run to, so I can do 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Sure.
Because I'm compelled to relay this question to you, because we are receiving a number of questions through chat room. But this gentleman, you may know him, is a professor at Seoul National University. Kim Byung-yeon is a very prominent scholar in the foreign affairs issues. He would like to ask you a question. Let me read it for you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cha, for your views on the issues very important for South Korea. Your discussion on reasons for an early deal with Kim Jong-un and against it is very interesting and relevant. I wonder whether the new Trump administration thinks or will think how to separate Kim from Putin before any talk with Kim. Otherwise, Kim is likely to demand big things because he may believe he has upper hands, even if he comes to the negotiation table. But that was the question. Any quick comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the factors that I mentioned, I personally think I tried to enumerate the factors in an objective fashion. If my own personal opinion is, I think of all those factors that might push for an early deal versus ones that might pull back, the most important one, I think, really is the North Korea need not to talk to the United States. That the strength of the relationship with Russia right now makes it such that Kim Jong-un really doesn't have a compelling need to gamble and try to talk with Trump again to have another failed meeting. I think in many ways he doesn't need that at this point, which also speaks to the question. It's very, very hard right now, I think, to try to separate North Korea and Russia. North Korea is getting everything that it wants, everything that it could have possibly wanted from China, it's now getting from Russia. And so I think it makes it very hard to separate them. The only avenue I see for doing this is if somehow the war in Ukraine stops. Because if the war in Ukraine stops, then Russia has no need for North Korean troops. Russia has less immediate need for ammunition. I mean, I think that ammunition relationship is a long-term relationship, frankly, but has less immediate need for ammunition. And if many more North Korean troops are dying and getting captured, that could be very embarrassing for Kim Jong-un, and that might be a disincentive for him to send more troops. So ironically, I don't think there's much the United States can do directly to North Korea to separate them from Russia. I think the best wedge into this is actually reducing Russian need for North Korean support.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Cha, one closing comment that I would expect from you is about the importance of trilateral alliance that we have established a few years ago. And I think, whatever the outcome we have from the ongoing upheaval here in Korea, in Korean politics, I think that has to be supported, maintained, and strengthened for the future of this country and also for the peace of Northeast Asia. In that respect, what would you say to Trump administration or the countries here in Northeast Asia about the likely role of this trilateral alliance amongst US, Japan, and Korea in dealing with the challenges we face, geopolitical challenges we face these days and in the future?
So I think it's very important, the trilateral relationship, Chairman John. I think it's extremely important. And I think the best argument to be made to the Trump administration is that it was their idea. I mean, they were the ones who actually started focusing on trilateralism. Of course, the Biden administration took it much further, but they were the ones who focused on it. And so I'm hopeful that they will continue to. I've talked to people, involved in the transition in the Trump administration, and they do think very positively about trilateral relations and what has been accomplished thus far. And the government in Japan, of course, is very supportive of it too. So the real question again comes down to the South Korean government and whether the next South Korean government, whatever government that might be, will continue to focus on this trilateralism. It was a very brave move by President Yoon to recreate, recreate a new narrative for the relationship with Japan and trilateralism. And that is something that was recognized all around the world. It may not have been as appreciated as much in South Korean domestic politics, but around the world, it was hugely recognized.
Okay. Thank you very much, Victor. Wish you all the best. Take care of yourself during your very hectic traveling schedule. Okay, next time, see you in person.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Happy New Year.
Bye now.